Hello everybody. So today in the NEET crash course, we will be discussing about the synopsis of two chapters, photosynthesis in higher plants and respiration in plants. Let us start off with photosynthesis in higher plants. Now, the first scientist who found out that green plants are involved in replenishing the air's quality, that is, providing it with oxygen, was Priestley. Now, before we get into any introduction, you have to know what photosynthesis is. So, photosynthesis is something which is carried out by autotrophic plants. Now, we call green plants as autotrophic. The reason we call them is autotrophic is because they are able to fix the atmospheric carbon dioxide. So, they can fix atmospheric carbon dioxide using the energy from the sunlight. So the energy is obtained from the sunlight and they can fix the atmospheric carbon dioxide in order to obtain the organic substances. So one of the organic substances that they produce as a result of photosynthesis is referred to as starch. One of the earliest scientists way back in 1770 to have worked on photosynthesis or to have worked exactly on what green plants do was using this typical bell jar experiment, as you can see here. He saw that when the rat was placed inside the bell jar and a burning candle flame, he saw that they both damaged the air inside. That led to the death of the rat, and also the candle fire got extinguished. But then later he placed a green plant in it, and he came to know that the fire burnt longer, the candle burnt longer, as well as the rat was alive for a longer duration. And that's how he concluded that probably something that the rat and the fire are removing or depleting in the atmospheric air is being provided by the green plant. And that was the germs of the concept of photosynthesis, where scientists later discovered that yes, green plants give out oxygen. Some of the other pioneering works was by Jan Ingenhousz, and Ingenhousz was the first one who identified that it is only the green parts of the plant that can carry out photosynthesis, and in the presence of sunlight they produce oxygen. And then it was Julius von Sachs who identified that the plants make food and store it in the form of starch, and T.W. Engelmann was very instrumental in identifying. He worked on a filamentous algae called Cladophora, and he identified that it is mostly the blue and the green regions of the spectrum which bring forth the highest rates of photosynthesis in green plants. He used a prism actually to split the white light into its component wavelengths, and he identified that maximum rate of photosynthesis happens in the blue and the red region. And it was Cornelius van Niel who, in 1897 to 1985, his time period, he identified that it was a substance which basically, as you can see here, a 2H2A, which gets oxidized and which produces reducing equivalents in order to reduce carbon dioxide, in order to produce CH2O, which is an organic compound. And because this substance itself gets oxidized in order to produce reducing equivalents, and we get a byproduct which is dependent on what this substance is. We today know that this A is nothing but oxygen. So we use water as a source of electrons and reducing equivalent, that is hydrogen, in order to reduce carbon dioxide, and we get oxygen as a byproduct, because the compound which produces the reducing equivalents, the electrons and the protons, is water in this case. And this was actually identified by Cornelius van Niel. If you were to look at the overall process of photosynthesis, it's an anabolic reaction. Anabolic reaction is a reaction where simple inorganic substances combine together to form complex organic substances like starch. So this is the formula for glucose. Actually, glucose is later polymerized in the form of starch. So 6 molecules of carbon dioxide combine with 12 molecules of water in the presence of sunlight. The energy for this process is derived from sunlight in order to obtain glucose molecule plus 6H2O plus 6CO2. This glucose molecule is actually further polymerized into sucrose by converting one of the glucose into fructose molecules, because all of you remember starch is only used for storage, but whenever it needs to be transported from one plant organ to another, it is transported in the form of sucrose and not in the form of starch. So where exactly does photosynthesis take place? The site of photosynthesis is the chloroplast molecule. Now all of you are aware that within the chloroplast molecule, which itself is a a double membraned structure, there is an outer membrane and an inner membrane in the chloroplast molecule, and you have certain stack-like membranous disc-like structures which are stacked one above the other like a stack of coins, and this is referred to as the grana. You have more than one granum, and therefore we say it's granas plural, which are connected by membranes which are referred to as the stromal lamellae or the frets. So basic organization of the chloroplast is that it has stacks of membranous disc-like structures which are referred to as the granum, and more than one granum are basically joined together by membranes which are referred to as the frets or the stromal lamellae. Clear? And now if you were to magnify this granum, so what is this space outside the granum? The space outside the granum, which I am putting dots over here, is referred to as the matrix of the chloroplast. Now this is something which is referred to as the stroma. Okay, now if you were to see these disc-like structures, let me show them like this, stacked one above the other. Each disc-like structure is referred to as a thylakoid. It is called a thylakoid, and the space inside the thylakoid is called as the lumen, and the space outside, like we saw, outside you have the stroma. So remember that one entire stack, which is made up of these disc-shaped membranous stack-like structures, is referred to as the granum. Correct? So one entire stack is called as the granum, and then you have on the granum, each membranous disc-like structure is referred to as the thylakoid, and inside the thylakoid, it is very important to know what I'm saying right now to understand the further processes. So inside the thylakoid, the space inside the thylakoid is referred to as the lumen, and the dots which I have shown outside is the stroma, the matrix of the chloroplast, which is referred to as the stroma. And very important thing is it is in the membrane of the thylakoid that the light reaction of photosynthesis takes place. So please remember, the light reactions of photosynthesis happen in the membrane of the thylakoid, whereas in the stroma, let me show it here, in the stroma it is mostly the dark reactions of the photosynthesis. So please bear in mind the light reaction happens in the thylakoid membrane, and the dark reaction happens inside the stroma. Please remember why it is called as light reaction and dark reaction. Light reaction because it is dependent on light, and dark reaction not because it happens in the dark. Dark reaction can happen in broad daylight as well, but it is called dark reaction because it does not require light. So which is the part of light that is absorbed, and which is the pigment in the plant that absorbs most of this light? Now if you were to plot the wavelength as well as the pigment molecules, that is how much they absorb, notice it is mostly chlorophyll A molecule that absorbs in both the blue region. So this region, if you were to draw a vertical from the chlorophyll A molecule, and this bluish green chlorophyll molecule is the chlorophyll A molecule. So it is mostly absorbing in the blue wavelength region and in the red wavelength region. And all of you should note the same thing corresponds to the peak of the rate of photosynthesis. So if you plot the rate of photosynthesis, it is referred to as the action spectrum. When we are talking about the rate of photosynthesis, it is called action spectrum. But when we are talking about which pigment absorbs what wavelength, it is referred to as absorption spectrum. Okay, so the first one is the absorption spectrum and the second one is the action spectrum. Notice how chlorophyll A molecule is absorbing maximally in the blue region and in the red region. Okay, now if you notice, why doesn't the rate of the here you can see that the chlorophyll A molecule, which is the blue green molecule, it almost touches the x-axis over here, but then why the rate is not falling down entirely? Because there are other pigment molecules, there are carotenoids, there are chlorophyll A molecule. So light is not always directly absorbed by the chlorophyll A molecule itself. So all of you should remember one thing: sometimes light can get absorbed by chlorophyll B, sometimes it can get absorbed by carotenoids. Okay, so sometimes the light which is absorbed by chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and these two molecules will funnel the light energy, whatever energy that they could capture from the light, they funnel it to the chlorophyll A molecule. So it is not necessary that chlorophyll A molecule has to directly absorb the light always, because chlorophyll B and carotenoid pigments are also capable of absorbing the light, and whatever light energy they absorb, it is ultimately funneled into chlorophyll A. So here why there is a graph, why the graph is not entirely becoming zero here, the rate of photosynthesis is not entirely becoming zero, because even though chlorophyll A is not directly absorbing light, chlorophyll B and carotenoids are still absorbing light, and they bring the light to chlorophyll A molecule, and therefore the graph doesn't touch the x-axis, as in it doesn't become completely zero in this case. So when you think about absorption, it is absorption spectrum. When you're talking about the rate of photosynthesis, as you can see, the rate is highest in the blue region and in the red region, corresponding to the absorption spectrum of chlorophyll A molecule. And like I said, why doesn't the rate come down entirely to zero? The rate doesn't entirely come down to zero because not only is chlorophyll A involved in absorption, some other pigments can also absorb and pass it on to chlorophyll A. Now coming to the light reaction, now all of you, I had told you about the chlorophyll in the chloroplast. We had discussed that in the chloroplast there are disc-like membranous stacked membranous structures. Remember that the chloroplast is a double membrane structure. There is an outer membrane and an inner membrane to the chloroplast, and this stack of disc-like structure that we have already learned is referred to as the granum. Now let me magnify one of these these cylindrical, these sac-like structures which are present in the granum. Okay, so let me take one of them here, and if I magnify them, so this is how this membrane will look like. Okay, now this is the, what did we call this one of these membranes? We called it as the thylakoid. Now then, the space inside the thylakoid, I already told you, the space inside the thylakoid is lumen. And what is this space outside the thylakoid where I am showing dots? So let me show dots here also outside the thylakoid. So these dots which are representing the matrix of the chloroplast, let me call them as, you know that the matrix of the chloroplast is called the stroma. Now, attached to the membrane of the thylakoid, you will find a special complex. See, I am showing it attached to the thylakoid membrane. And now let me make a rounded compartment over here. And this rounded compartment is what is referred to as the light harvesting complex. The light harvesting complex is abbreviated as LHC. So now you know that LHC is attached to the membrane of the thylakoid, and I made a rounded structure here, this compartment. This is called the light harvesting complex, and this compartment is what is shown over here. Let me again put a boundary to this light harvesting complex. So let me put a red colored circle. So this red circle that you're seeing here is magnified over here in this particular diagram. This is referred to as the light harvesting complex. What is present in the light harvesting complex? So until now you understood that the light harvesting complex is a very, very integral component of the membrane of the thylakoid. So we first took the chloroplast. In that we took a stack called granum. In that I took one single membranous disc. What is that single membranous disc called? It is called thylakoid. In the membrane of the thylakoid, I told you that I have taken a complex. In that complex, I told you, let me shade this circular area. This shaded circular area in this complex is called light harvesting complex, which is magnified over here. There is a pigment in the center of this light harvesting complex. See, I am putting a circle around it. I am coloring it in red. This pigment molecule is always chlorophyll A, and this pigment molecule is what is referred to as the reaction center. It is called the reaction center. Okay, that's what is labeled over here. This pigment molecule, the major pigment molecule sitting in the center of the light harvesting complex is called chlorophyll A. So now what comes and falls on the light harvesting complex? Sunlight comes and falls. So let me draw sun over here like this. So sun is giving out its rays and the sunlight comes and falls onto the light harvesting complex. Notice that here they have mentioned photon. Photon are the packets of energy found in the sunlight. So when sunlight falls on the reaction center, it may fall directly on chlorophyll A, or there are a lot of pigments surrounding the chlorophyll A molecule. These pigment molecules which surround the central pigment, which is called the reaction center, these are called the antenna molecules. So let me label them as antenna pigments. So see, when light falls on them, they get excited and then they pass on their energy. There is an energy that is liberated from them called inductive energy or Foster's energy. They pass on that energy. See how from a chain reaction they're passing from one to another, and ultimately where are they funneling the energy? They're funneling the energy to chlorophyll A molecule. Okay, then what will happen to the chlorophyll A molecule? The chlorophyll A molecule gets excited. This blue arrow indicates ionization. What is an atom? What happens to an atom when we say that it gets ionized? When we say that it gets ionized, that means electrons are stripped out of it. So this chlorophyll A molecule, two electrons get stripped out of the chlorophyll A molecules from the reaction center. Why? Because the surrounding antenna pigments brought energy and funneled it into the chlorophyll A molecule, and these two electrons are picked up by an electron acceptor, which is called the primary acceptor. Primary acceptor is sitting somewhere over here in the top. So let us consider this to be the primary acceptor. Okay, so the electron that is released by the chlorophyll A molecule, say I'm showing here, two electrons are picked up by the primary acceptor molecule that is sitting inside this complex. Where is this complex present? This complex is present in the membrane of the thylakoid. Is that clear? So I told you in the membrane of the thylakoid there is a complex. Within that I showed you a circular area. What is that circular area called? Light harvesting complex. We have magnified the light harvesting complex here. The central pigment in the light harvesting complex is chlorophyll A. It is called the reaction center. Light falls onto which of these molecules? These are called the antenna pigments which are surrounding the chlorophyll A. They pass on their energy. What is this energy called? This energy that is passing on, it is called resonance or inductive or Foster's energy. Okay, so this resonance or inductive or Foster's energy is passed on to which is the central pigment which is sitting in the light harvesting complex, the chlorophyll A molecule. Then the chlorophyll A molecule will get ionized. Two electrons, actually in the reaction center there are two chlorophyll A molecules that are sitting there. So two chlorophyll A molecules give out two electrons. Who picks up the two electrons? The primary acceptor. Okay, then one more very important thing I just told you. So again let me show you the chlorophyll, the chloroplast, outer membrane, inner membrane of the chloroplast, and then let us show one granum, a membranous stack. Then let us magnify the thylakoid, one particular thylakoid I am showing here. In the membrane of the thylakoid, what is the space inside the thylakoid called? The lumen. And what is the space outside the dots which I am showing here? This is the matrix. What do you call the matrix of chloroplast? The matrix of chloroplast is referred to as stroma. So let me label this as stroma. Okay. Now where is the pigment system sitting? That complex sitting. It is sitting here. Now I'll tell you the meaning of photosystem. So let me draw it a little bigger. It is sitting in the membrane of the thylakoid. This is the membrane of the thylakoid. See, this what I'm labeling here is the thylakoid membrane. Now this system is sitting there. Then I told you there's a rounded area. What is this rounded area? Light harvesting complex. Let me show a circle here in this rounded area. You will tell me what it is now. Now this shaded area is I told you it is called the light harvesting complex, LHC. And I told you in the center of the light harvesting complex, which is the reaction center, chlorophyll A. How many molecules of chlorophyll A? 2 molecules of chlorophyll A. And then I told you when the light comes and hits the light harvesting complex, that is sunlight, when it hits the light harvesting complex, I told you that this chlorophyll A molecule will give out how many electrons? 2 electrons, because there are 2 chlorophyll A molecules. Then I told you there is another molecule sitting up here. This is the one that first accepts the electron. So what do we call this? We call this molecule as the primary electron acceptor. This is not it. The electron has to go further. So there are lot of other molecules which are attached to the membrane of the thylakoid. See, I'm showing so many more structures here attached to the membrane of the thylakoid. So the electron coming from the primary electron acceptor will start jumping among them. It will start moving from one acceptor to another acceptor, and so on and so forth. So what are these referred to as? This is referred to as the electron transport chain, because there are a series of, what should I write in bracket? Electron carriers. And these electron carriers are constantly carrying the electrons from the primary electron acceptor. They are carrying the electrons from one to the other. See how it is? All these are electrons only. Electrons are jumping from one carrier to another. This entire system where you have light harvesting complex, then you have primary electron acceptor, then you have electron transport chain, is referred to as the photosystem. So what is a photosystem made up of? A photosystem is made up of, first one, it is made up of the light harvesting complex, LHC, and then in that I told you there is a reaction center, 2 molecules of chlorophyll A sitting in the center, correct? And then what else? I told you there is a primary electron acceptor, and then I told you there are electron carriers. Electron carriers are a part of electron transport chain. And why should the electron keep jumping like that? So that it can produce energy, which is a very, very important aspect of the light reaction. So there are 2 types of light photosystem. That is, photosystem can be abbreviated as PS, PS1 and PS2. 1 and PS2, depending on which is the chlorophyll A molecule sitting in the light harvesting complex. In PS1, the chlorophyll A molecule can absorb a maximum wavelength of 700 nanometer. So it is called chlorophyll A 700, or it is simply called P700. In PS2, the chlorophyll A molecule can absorb a wavelength of a maximum of 680. So it is chlorophyll A 680, or it is simply referred to as P680. So on what basis? And of course the electron carriers are also different in each of these photosystems. Okay. So now let us go to non-cyclic photophosphorylation, the same process that we discussed. See, LHC stands for light harvesting complex. Now here they have mentioned photosystem 1 and then photosystem 2. Okay, so let me draw the thylakoid now again. Let me draw it, a very big thylakoid here, and let me draw a double membrane. Not a double membrane, a single membrane. This is the membrane of thylakoid. Okay, so what is inside the thylakoid? I told you, inside the thylakoid I told you is the lumen. What is outside the thylakoid? Outside the thylakoid is the stroma. Okay, now the first electron, now this is light reaction we are talking about. In non-cyclic photophosphorylation, the first photosystem that is involved, which is attached to the membrane of the thylakoid, is called photosystem 2. Photosystem 2 means it has a light harvesting complex with a reaction center. See, this is the reaction center. The reaction center is chlorophyll A680. Okay, and then the primary acceptor in photosystem 2, it is called pheophytin. See, everything is different. In PS2, in photosystem 2, the center, the reaction, what is this? This is the light harvesting complex. So in the light harvesting complex, remember we are talking about the membrane of the thylakoid. In the light harvesting complex, the reaction center is chlorophyll A680, and then the primary. So now what will happen is light will fall onto the light harvesting complex, and now this chlorophyll A680 molecule will release 2 electrons. The 2 electrons are first picked up by pheophytin. Now what pheophytin will do is it will transfer the 2 electrons to a tightly bound protein with this photosystem 2, which is called plastoquinone A. Okay, so now these 2 electrons are going to plastoquinone A. Now plastoquinone A cannot move, it is tightly bound. Now it will pass on the electron to another electron carrier that is called plastoquinone B. So from A, the 2 electrons will go on to plastoquinone B. See, this is what is called electron transport system here. Okay, so what happened first? First light struck. Which photosystem am I talking about here? I am talking about this entire complex is called photosystem 2. Which is the reaction center in the photosystem 2? Chlorophyll A680. That means it can absorb a molecule. So let me write it here. The reaction center is chlorophyll A680. In brackets, let me write PS2. They are mentioned here in the textbook. PS2. See here. Okay. So now, after light fell onto it, the chlorophyll A680 molecule got ionized. It gave out 2 electron, which is the primary electron. See, in pink it is given here, primary electron acceptor. Now you know the primary electron acceptor is pheophytin. From there, the electron passes on to quinone A, plastoquinone A. From there it passes on to plastoquinone B. Now what happens is there will be another complex here. This complex, which is present very close to PS2, which acts as a bridge between PS2 and PS1, is referred to as the cytochrome. It is referred to as cytochrome B6 and F complex. Cytochrome B6 and F. So this plastoquinone B will give its electrons to the cytochrome B and F. So first it gives to B, and then B passes it on to F, cytochrome B and F. And very, very, very important is when 2 electrons are passing through this particular complex, that is cytochrome B and F, what will happen is there is a special mechanism in cytochrome B and F that when plastoquinone B is passing its 2 electrons, something gets pumped from the stroma to the thylakoid lumen. What is it that gets pumped? 4 protons get pumped. 4 protons per electron, it is 2 proton. So since there are 2 electrons, it is 4 protons. From where to where is it getting pumped? The 4 protons are getting pumped from the stroma to what? To the this one, which is this region. This region is called as the lumen. So now we got how many protons from the stroma to lumen? We got 4 protons. Where did we get it? Between plastoquinone B and cytochrome B6 and F complex. Correct? Now what happens is the electron passes into a soluble electron carrier present on the inner side of the thylakoid lumen, which is called PC, plastocyanin. I'll write the full forms later. So electron is picked up by plastocyanin. And now what this plastocyanin will do is it will pass on the electron to the next photosystem. The next major photosystem that is present on the thylakoid is referred to as PS2. So it is passing on these PS1. The plastocyanin is giving these 2 electrons to PS1. In PS1, let me show a rounded area. Whenever I show a rounded area, you should immediately recall it is the light harvesting complex. Inside the rounded area, if I show a circle, it is a central pigment. In this case, the central pigment is chlorophyll A 700. So we call such a photosystem with chlorophyll A 700 in its light harvesting complex as PS1. So the electron is picked up by, see, the same thing is shown here. This is PS1, light harvesting complex. So this is actually PS1 chlorophyll A 700. Okay, now see what happens is these 2 electrons will be carried forward here. Okay, but for this chlorophyll A700 which received these 2 electrons, for it to give out these 2 electrons, again light has to fall onto chlorophyll A molecule here also. So again what will happen? Photon will fall, light will fall onto it. And now this chlorophyll A700 molecule will also give out 2 electrons. There are a lot of electron carriers which are present in photosystem 1, but I will directly jump to the major one which is present here outside near the the stromal side, which is called as ferredoxin. Now what this ferredoxin will do to the 2 electron is, the ferredoxin will transfer the 2 electron to a molecule that is a coenzyme which is called NADP plus. And one more important thing what it does is, from the stroma only it takes 2 protons. So this ferredoxin will take these 2 electrons, and from the stroma it takes 2 protons and it adds it to NADP plus, and this NADP plus as a result gets reduced into NADPH. So the final product here is NADPH. Please bear in mind, in non-cyclic photophosphorylation, in the end we are getting NADPH. So who added this NADP plus molecule? It was ferredoxin. Now this FD is ferredoxin. It takes these 2 electrons that are coming from chlorophyll A700 from PS2 and it picks up 2 protons. Where did it pick up these 2 protons from? It picked it up from the stroma. It adds the 2 electrons and 2 protons to NADP plus and reducing it into NADPH. This is a very important thing. And now let me write the full forms over here for you. So what is the full form of Q? Q is nothing but plastoquinone. So plastoquinone A and plastoquinone B. QUINONE. Then what is the full form of PC? PC means plastocyanin. Then what is the full form of FD? FD means ferredoxin. Okay, so ferredoxin is the one that takes 2 electrons and 2 protons and then it adds it to NADP plus. All of you please remember this NADPH molecule, because this NADPH acts as a reducing power, not over here but in dark reaction. Reducing power in dark cycle, in dark reaction. So imagine if NADPH is not produced over here, then dark reaction cannot happen. Is it clear? Okay, so this was about the last. So here if you rotate the screen, you can see that the flow of electron is like, see here you can see the flow of electron is like the Z alphabet Z, isn't it? So as a result, this scheme is called the Z scheme. Here also if you see, it has flown in a Z like pattern if you see it from the sideways, and that's why it is referred to as the Z scheme. So we saw one product now, that is NADPH. Now what is the other product which I wanted to tell you is, again let me draw the thylakoid lumen, the thylakoid with the membrane and the thylakoid lumen and the stroma. So this is the lumen, and whatever dots you see everywhere around the thylakoid is the stroma. Now why I am showing this again is, to tell you about another very important process that happens in non-cyclic photophosphorylation. First it was PS2, isn't it? In PS2 there was light harvesting complex, there was chlorophyll A. I'm going to label only the important parts, everything is in the previous slide. Chlorophyll A 680. And then primary electron acceptor I told you was pheophytin. So then light falls onto, so this is PS2. Remember, PS2 has a reaction center of chlorophyll A680. Chlorophyll A680 gives out 2 electron picked up by the pheophytin. Pheophytin passes it on to a tightly bound plastoquinone A, which passes it on to a mobile plastoquinone B. The plastoquinone B will pass it on into another complex that is called cytochrome B6 complex, cytochrome B6 and F complex. Cytochrome B6 and F complex, which will pass it on to a mobile electron carrier called plastocyanin, which will carry the electrons to another photosystem which has a light harvesting complex with chlorophyll A700 sitting inside. Now what is this chlorophyll A700 containing photosystem? It is PS1. And then finally the electron, again light has to fall onto this, and then the electron is passed on to the one of the last electron acceptors, that is ferredoxin, which will pick up 2 protons from the stroma, and it will add the 2 protons and 2 electrons both to a molecule called NADP plus, which gets reduced into NADPH. This much we had learnt. Now what I want to show you here is, I told you that when the plastoquinone B passes on its 2 electrons to cytochrome B6 and F, from the stroma to the thylakoid lumen, I told you 4 protons are pumped. So please bear in mind, for a 1 electron it is 2 protons. Since 2 electrons are passing over here, we get 4 protons. This you keep in mind. Another thing is, in the PS2, when light falls onto PS2, there is a special complex on the luminal side of PS2 which is called the oxygen evolving complex, which is abbreviated as OEC. Now what this complex does is, when light falls onto this chlorophyll A, the light harvesting complex of PS2, so please remember this PS2 is what has this complex that is called oxygen evolving complex. So now what happens is, the oxygen evolving complex, as soon as light hits it, it gets activated. It contains manganese in it, okay, and then it splits a water molecule H2O into half a molecule of oxygen, or 1 oxygen atom plus 2 electrons plus 2 protons. Now what will it do with these electrons? Now remember that when light fell onto chlorophyll A, it gave out 2 electrons. So now it is in short of 2 electrons because it has given away the 2 electrons. So these 2 electrons will fill the gap which is created in the chlorophyll A molecule that has now become oxidized. So whatever electron the chlorophyll A680 lost, it will be replenished with these 2 electrons. So now how many protons do we have in the thylakoid lumen? We have 4 protons that are coming in from cytochrome B6 and F complex, and 2 protons that are coming in from the splitting of water molecule. This splitting of water molecule is called photolysis of water. It is referred to as the photolysis of water. So totally, if you can see, we have 4 protons plus 2 protons, that is 6 protons. I want you to bear in mind about these 6 protons. Later we will see that this 6 protons, through a special mechanism, it has the ability to generate 2 molecules of ATP. So 6 protons will give us 2 molecules of ATP. ATP is nothing but the energy currency of the cell. So what are the 2 products of non-cyclic photophosphorylation? One is NADPH, which is very, very important for dark reaction. 2 is ATP molecule. Both 1 and 2 are useful for what? For dark reaction. Without 1 and 2, dark reactions cannot happen. That's the importance of both 1 and 2. Do you understand? So how did we get ATP? We will come to that later, but for now, what is responsible for ATP? The protons which get collected, the H plus ions which get collected in the lumen of the thylakoid are what are responsible for the generation of ATP. See, in cyclic photophosphorylation, it is very simple. Again, if I were to show the thylakoid membrane, I'll not show you the entire one this time. So this is the thylakoid membrane, this is the lumen. It is very simple because here the only photosystem involved is photosystem 1, means it has a light harvesting complex with what as the reaction center with this is photosystem 1, so obviously the reaction center will be chlorophyll A 700. Okay, now what is this? This is the light harvesting complex. So sunlight comes and falls onto the light harvesting complex, and chlorophyll A molecule will now get activated. It will get ionized, it will release 2 electrons. The 2 electrons are picked up by a lot of electron acceptors, A0, A1, then there is F of X, then there is F of D, AB. Okay, so many electron acceptors, and then it passes through ferredoxin reducing substance, that is ferredoxin reducing substance, then ferredoxin, and then it passes through cytochrome B6 and F. All these are electron carriers, cytochrome B6 and F, and then it passes through plastocyanin. But see the thing here, wherever the electron flows, the electron comes back to where it left from. Where did it leave? It left chlorophyll A 700 molecule. So whatever electron that we got out of this system, it is passing through a series of electron carriers. If you remember in the Z scheme, the electron that left PS2, it did not come back to PS2, but here the electron comes back to PS1, and that's why it is a cyclic process, isn't it? It is like a cycle. Whatever electron went out of chlorophyll A 700 through plastocyanin, it is coming back to chlorophyll A 700. Did you understand? As a result, this is referred to as cyclic photophosphorylation. Now the chemiosmotic model is what I was telling you. So I showed you the cyclic photophosphorylation. The chemiosmotic model is I was talking, and one important thing about cyclic photophosphorylation is there is no NADPH produced, but again during cytochrome B6, when the electron is passing through cytochrome B6 and F, what happens is 4 protons are pumped from where to where? From the stroma, this is the stroma, to the lumen of the thylakoid. And I told you what is the use of these 4 protons. They will be used for the synthesis of, in this case, only 1 ATP molecule. In non-cyclic photophosphorylation, it was synthesizing 2 ATP molecules, correct? In cyclic photophosphorylation, there is only 1 ATP molecule. And one more thing you have to remember, the only product of the cyclic photophosphorylation, the only product of cyclic photophosphorylation is ATP. There is no production of NADPH. NADPH is produced only during non-cyclic. Now exactly how those protons, again let us see the thylakoid lumen here. This is the thylakoid lumen where the membrane of the thylakoid, where everything happened, and you know that protons got collected over here. Say for example, we have 4 protons coming from cytochrome B6 and F complex, and 2 protons coming in from splitting of water, that is oxygen evolving complex in non-cyclic photophosphorylation. Okay, even though it is okay, so I was supposed to write this in the next slide, so let me do that here. This model of ATP synthesis, which I'm going to show you now, is called the chemiosmotic model. So in the chemiosmotic model, I have shown the thylakoid. This is the lumen of the thylakoid, and this is the stroma of the thylakoid. Okay, so now what happens is, what kept accumulating here? Protons kept accumulating. How many protons in cyclic? 4 protons in cyclic. How many protons in non-cyclic? 6 protons accumulated in non-cyclic. Now what happens is, there is a special enzyme that is sitting in the wall of the thylakoid, and this special membrane, this special enzyme has a basal disc like this, and it has a stalk and a head like structure which is projecting out into the stroma. This is the stroma, remember. So now what happens is, because the concentration of H plus ion has become very high outside in comparison to the H plus ion concentration inside the stroma, so now what will happen is, this H plus ion will start getting, it will diffuse from inside to the outside, and when it diffuses from the inside to the outside, this molecule will use this proton motive force. The flow of proton will create a force called proton motive force in order to add adenosine diphosphate plus phosphate to synthesize what we need, that is adenosine triphosphate. This adenosine triphosphate is what is required for the light reaction, isn't it? So I hope you understood how the proton gradient is required for synthesis of ATP, and this molecule that is sitting on the thylakoid membrane like this, which helps in the synthesis of ATP, is called the ATP synthase. Okay. So now moving on to the dark reaction, the Calvin cycle. It's called C3 cycle because the product obtained has a 3-carbon compound in it. The first stable compound that is formed is a 3-carbon compound. And where is this Calvin cycle happening? The Calvin cycle is happening not in the thylakoid. We are done with the thylakoid. It is happening in the stroma of the chloroplast. Okay. Now during this Calvin cycle, it is the actual cycle where carbon dioxide is fixed. Do you understand? Now one molecule of carbon dioxide, that is this carbon dioxide molecule, why do we need to fix carbon dioxide molecule? If you remember the equation, we need to synthesize glucose. Glucose has 6 carbon compounds. That means the Calvin cycle must happen 6 times. So I am going to show you the 6 times of Calvin cycle in one go. Let us see how 6 times Calvin cycle happens, because you need to make a 6-carbon compound by fixing the atmospheric carbon dioxide. Okay, so the first compound here, because it is 6 times the whole cycle is happening, I'm going to be writing 6 everywhere. So first we have 6-ribulose bisphosphate molecule. This 6-ribulose, that means 6 molecules of ribulose bisphosphate, which is a 5-carbon compound, will combine with 6 molecules of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to form 12 molecules of a 3-carbon compound called phosphoglyceric acid. Phosphoglyceric acid is 3-carbon compound. So in brackets, whatever I write, 3C, 5C, that means how many carbon atoms are there. So now how many carbon atoms do we have at our disposal over here? We have this 6 into totally 5-carbon compound. We have 30 carbons with us. Here how many carbon atoms do we have at our disposal? 6 into 1, 6 carbon. So 30 plus 6, we get how many carbon? 36 carbon. Now how many molecules of 3 carbon can you split 36 carbon into? You can split it into 12 molecules of 3 carbon compound. Let us calculate now. 12 molecules into 3 carbon. Do we have 36? 12 3s are 36. Now this phosphoglyceric acid is actually a 3-carbon compound. It is a 3-carbon compound. And that's why we call this cycle as C3 cycle. Now this 12 molecules of phosphoglyceric acid will be converted into 12 molecules of biphosphoglyceric acid, and for this we need 12 molecules of ATP. So 12 molecules of ATP are converted to 12 molecules of ADP and phosphate, and whatever energy is obtained is used up for this reaction to convert 12 molecules of phosphoglyceric acid into 12 molecules of biphosphoglyceric acid. And now what happens is this 12 molecule of biphosphoglyceric acid is reduced into 12 molecules of phosphoglyceraldehyde. So again here it is 12 into 3 carbon, that is 36 carbon. Again PgAl is 12 into 3 carbon, that is 36 carbon. Now this reduction is where we need NADPH. So NADPH reduces this molecule 12 BPGA into 12 PgAl. It itself gets oxidized into NADP plus. So how many molecules here? 12. So this is where light reaction. See, where did we get this 12 ATP from? We got it from light reaction. Where did we get this 12 NADPH from? We got it from light reaction. Otherwise these two equations would not have happened. Okay. Now out of these 12 molecules of PgAl, out of 36 we need only 6 for glucose synthesis. So we will put aside 2 molecules of PgAl, because if I have 2 molecules of PgAl, which is a 3 carbon compound, I have with me 2 into 3 carbon, which is 6 carbon, using which I can easily synthesize 1 molecule of glucose. So how many PgAl am I left with? I am left with 10 molecules of PgAl. So now I have with me 10 into 3 carbon, that is 30 carbon. So using this 30, I can get back what I started with. My goal is to regenerate the starting raw material, that is 6 molecules, because here also if you see it is 6 5s are 30, here it is 10 3s are 30. The carbon atoms are the same. But I can't directly convert PgAl to RuBP. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this 10 PgAl. Initially I will be converting it into 6 molecules of ribulose monophosphate. So I need to add one more phosphate to this. This is also a 5 carbon. So with me I have 6 into 5 carbon, that is 30 carbon. So that's the same. I still have 30 carbon with me. How do you make mono into bisphosphate? Bis means 2-phosphate. So for that what I will need an additional 6 molecules of ATP. So I use 6 molecules of ATP in order to regenerate what I started with, that is 6 molecules of RuBP. Okay, so totally if you see, starting I used 12 ATPs plus here I use 16 ATPs. So for 1 molecule of glucose I am using 12 plus 6, that is equal to 18 ATPs. And how much NADPH am I using? 12. Is that clear? So the goal is we start off with RuBP, we end up with RuBP again. But why is it called Calvin's C3 cycle? Because of this. This first stable compound that is formed is a 3 carbon compound. The name given to this 3 carbon compound is 12 molecules of PgA, and you can also see how we have calculated the carbon atoms. 12 molecules of PgA is 12 into 3, 36. That gets reduced by, that gets phosphorylated by 12 molecules of ATP into 12 molecules of BPGA that has 2 phosphate groups. Bisphospho means 2 phosphate groups. Now bisphospho gets reduced into, what does it get reduced into? PgAl, phosphoglyceraldehyde, that is also called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate or G3P. And that who is the one who is reducing it? It is the NADPH molecule. Out of 12 PgAl, that is 12 into 3, 36 carbon, we kept aside only 2 of PgAl because we have with us 6 carbon. And 6 carbon is enough to make 1 glucose, because 1 glucose is 6 carbon. And how much were we left with? We were left with 10 molecules of PgAl. What did we do to this 10 molecule of PgAl? We saw that 10 3s are 30. We could get back what we started with, but through an intermediate called RuMP, which is regenerating with the help of another ATP, 6 ATP molecules, we get back 6 molecules of RuBP. So what you noticed here is, for 1 glucose molecule, you used 6 carbon dioxide, okay, and you used initially for the first step of phosphorylation you use 12 ATP molecules, and then you use reduction. For reduction you use 12 NADPH molecules, and in the regeneration you used 6 molecules of ATP. So totally you are using 6 plus 12, that is 18 molecules of ATP. Now you know why the light reaction is so very important, because where did we get the ATP and NADPH? We got the ATP and NADPH from the light reaction. If you were to, in the textbook, what they have done, they have given with respect to one carbon dioxide. It cannot happen like that. It is only theoretical. If you consider only one carbon dioxide, then what happens is, for one carbon dioxide that couples with one molecule of ribulose bisphosphate, then you have 6 carbon here and you have 1 carbon here. So you get, 6 into, this is 5, not 6 carbon. You have 5 carbon here, you have 1 carbon. If you are considering only 1, for glucose we have to always consider 6 carbon dioxide. But theoretically, if you were to calculate, you would get 6 carbon compound, and that 6 carbon compound, in order to convert that into, you would get how much of 2 PGA? You would get 2 molecules of PGA out of this 6 carbon, because it is 2 into 3 carbon, which is equal to 6 carbon. Then for you to convert 2 PGA into 2 BPGA, you would only require how many ATP molecules? 2 ATP molecules. Okay, and then for you to get 2 PPGA from 2 BPGA to get 2 molecules of phosphoglyceraldehyde, how many NADPH molecules you would require? You would require 2 molecules of NADPH. And then for regeneration of what you started with, that is 1 molecule of RUBP, you would require only 1 ATP molecule. So totally you are using up 2 plus 1, that is 3 ATPs, and totally you are using up only 2 NADPH. This is if you consider what? This is if you consider 1 carbon dioxide. But the right way is 1 glucose molecule, you consider 6 carbon dioxide molecule. So for that means how many times is the Calvin cycle happening? Like I told you, the Calvin cycle is happening 6 times. It's happening 6 times. Okay. C4 pathway is a very unique pathway that is seen in certain plants which exhibit. In the C3 pathway, we saw the first stable compound was phosphoglyceric acid, but here the first stable compound is a 4 carbon compound. It is called oxaloacetic acid, and it happens in 2 different cells. The green cell is called as a mesophyll cell, and the gray cell is a bundle cell that is present very close to the xylem and phloem. So xylem plus phloem is somewhere over here in the leaf, remember, and the cell closer to that is the bundle sheath cell, and then you have the mesophyll cell, which is basically away from it. So which is the cell which first captures atmospheric carbon dioxide? It is the mesophyll cell, and this fixes, which is the carbon dioxide acceptor. It is not RUBP here, it is phosphoenol pyruvate, and we get oxaloacetic acid. The oxaloacetic acid passes through the plasmodesmata into the bundle cell, and there it gets converted into the C4, oxaloacetic acid gets converted, it gets decarboxylated, and you get a carbon dioxide. Decarboxylation means you are removing what? You are removing carbon dioxide from this oxalic acid, and then this particular carbon dioxide is entering Calvin cycle. So it is inside the bundle cell that Calvin cycle takes place, and then you get a C3 acid, which is pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid is sent back to the mesophyll cell. Pyruvic acid is helping in regeneration of the phosphoenol pyruvate that we require in order to accept the carbon dioxide in this case. So the enzyme that brings about the carbon dioxide fixation here, in the previous Calvin cycle, I forgot to tell you, carbon dioxide and RUBP are combined by Rubisco, but here there is an enzyme that is called the pepcase. Pepcase is the name of the enzyme which helps in the combination of phosphoenol pyruvate with carbon dioxide. So we get oxaloacetic acid, but remember, while it is transferred, the oxaloacetic acid is transferred in the form of malic acid, and then it gets decarboxylated to form the C3 acid, which is sent back to. The question is, why can't carbon dioxide fixation happen in the bundle cell itself? That is because the bundle cells contain in them the granule chloroplast, That means normal chloroplast which have, the bundle cells contain in them A granule chloroplast. A granule chloroplast means there is no grana. If there is no grana, there is no splitting of water, so there is no oxygen. Why do we need no oxygen conditions here? Because no oxygen conditions will allow normal Calvin cycle to take place. There is one enzyme involved in Calvin cycle which is very, very important, that is Rubisco. If that Rubisco has no oxygen available, then it can focus purely on Calvin cycle. That's why in this bundle sheath cell, there are A granule chloroplast without any oxygen, and therefore Calvin cycle is restricted only to the A granule chloroplast. Here Calvin cycle cannot happen because here the chloroplasts are granule, there is lot of oxygen in it. When oxygen is very high, then what happens is the Rubisco enzyme involved in Calvin cycle, it will get deviated to a different pathway that is referred to as the photorespiratory pathway, and as a result the C4 pathway will not be carried out normally and Calvin cycle will not happen normally. Okay, moving on to the next chapter, that is respiration in plants. Now respiration is opposite of photosynthesis because respiration is a catabolic process. Here you are breaking down the glucose molecule. In photosynthesis you are forming the glucose molecule, but in respiration you are breaking down the glucose molecule in the presence of oxygen. So this is the equation for aerobic respiration. Because you are using oxygen, you get carbon dioxide as a byproduct, water, and lot of energy. The same respiration which is happening in animal cells is also happening in plant cells. The first step of respiration is glycolysis. Glycolysis, as you all know, it is a common pathway for both aerobic and anaerobic respiration, and glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay. Glycolysis, see the steps all of you. Glucose is converted to glucose 6-phosphate, fructose 6-phosphate, then one extra phosphate is added from ATP, then we get then fructose 1,6-bisphosphate is split into two molecules. One is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Now whatever follows here, this particular thing happens twice. These set of reaction happen twice. Why do they happen twice? Because once they happen from the triose phosphate, that is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and then the dihydroxyacetone phosphate will get converted to this glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and then again these steps will happen. So basically we have two steps, two times this particular step happening, and this step is what gives us ATP. So it is referred to as the payoff phase. Did you notice that in the preparatory phase, one ATP got used up here, one ATP got used up here? Okay, in the payoff phase we get one ATP here, we get one ATP here, but since it is happening twice, we get 4 ATP. But why we are saying this is the gross ATP gain? Because we have to subtract 2 from this. Why do we have to subtract 2? Because 2 of them are used up in the preparatory phase. So the net ATP gain from glycolysis is only 2 ATPs that we get, and we also get a very important reducing agent, that is a very important compound which plays a very important role in generation of ATP, that is NADH. This also we get 2. Why do we get 2 NADH? Because this reaction, like I told you, happens twice. Once it happens from glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, once it happens from the conversion of dihydroxyacetone phosphate to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So how many NADH are we getting? We are getting 2 molecules of NADH. And the outcome of glycolysis is we get 2 molecules of pyruvic acid from one glucose. So one glucose molecule, which is a 6-carbon, is broken down into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, and pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon, so 2 3s are 6. And what are we getting in return? We are getting 2 ATP. Why not 4 ATP? Because 2 got consumed in the first few reactions. So we get 2 ATP, and how many NADH2? Why not 1 NADH but 2-NADH, because I told you after this entire step happens twice. Once it happens from the existing glyceraldehyde, once it happens from the conversion of dihydroxyacetone into glyceraldehyde. What happens to pyruvic acid? The pyruvic acid has different fates. Now, for example, if it is anaerobic, then anaerobic means when there is no oxygen supply. In case of, say, in yeast, in primitive eukaryotes like yeast, or if you say in bacteria, or even in some of our own cells like muscle cells, we exhibit a process which is referred to as fermentation. There may be two types of fermentation happening. One is called the lactic acid fermentation, one is called ethanol fermentation. So ethanol fermentation is mostly seen in yeast, and lactic acid is seen in bacteria like curdling bacteria as well as our own muscles. But remember, in both, only about 7% of the glucose's energy is liberated. It's a very short pathway. Not much of the glucose energy is released in this, and not much of the byproducts are also produced over here. So what happens is, whatever NADH we obtained from glucose, it gets oxidized into NAD plus, in the sense pyruvic acid gets reduced into lactic acid in the case of lactic acid fermentation, or it gets reduced into alcohol and carbon dioxide in alcoholic fermentation. Who is the reducing agent here? The reducing agent is NADH. And where did we get the reducing agent from? We got it from glycolysis. So in anaerobic respiration, there's no much scope for anaerobic respiration to give us more energy, because we get only a very short pathway where pyruvic acid is quickly reduced to lactic acid. And who is the reducing agent? NADH. Or pyruvic acid is quickly reduced into ethanol and carbon dioxide. And who is the reducing agent? It is NADH. What if it's there is availability of oxygen? Then what happens is, in the first step in glycolysis, we saw glucose got converted into 2-pyruvic acid molecule. So this was glycolysis. Now this pyruvic acid molecule goes on to take part in a pathway that is called the Krebs cycle, which happens in the mitochondrial matrix. Until now, glycolysis happened in the cytoplasm, but if there is oxygen available, then the 2-pyruvic acid molecule, instead of entering fermentation, they will be picked up by the mitochondria, and they will enter the mitochondrial matrix, and there they will take part in a cycle called Krebs cycle. Before the Krebs cycle, pyruvic acid needs to get converted into acetyl coenzyme A. This is the bridging reaction between glycolysis and Krebs cycle. So we have glycolysis. Where is glycolysis happening? It is happening in the cytoplasm. And we have Krebs cycle. Where is Krebs cycle happening? It's happening in the mitochondrial matrix. And who is the one that bridges? This reaction is the one that bridges the two, that is the glycolysis and Krebs cycle. Pyruvic acid, in the presence of coenzyme A and an oxidizing agent, that is NAD+, in the presence of magnesium ions and pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme, it gets converted into a 2-carbon compound. It was a 3-carbon compound. It is now converted to 2-carbon compound called acetyl coenzyme A, giving out carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And notice NAD+, which is an oxidizing agent over here, is itself reduced into NADH, and we get a H+ ion. So this is what is the bridging reaction between glycolysis and, so what is the product of glycolysis? Pyruvic acid was the product of glycolysis. And what is the raw material for Krebs cycle? Acetyl coenzyme A is the raw material for Krebs cycle. So glycolysis, the end product of glycolysis is converted into acetyl coenzyme A, which feeds the Krebs cycle. So this acts as a bridge between glycolysis and Krebs cycle. So now again you can see the Krebs cycle over here. Now in many books they consider this first bridging pathway as a part of Krebs cycle. So that's why they have given it here as it is. Okay. So we saw that the 3-carbon pyruvic acid is converted to 2-carbon acetyl coenzyme A in the presence of the reducing oxidizing agent, that is NAD plus, which gets reduced into NADH. So this is the first NADH that we are getting. I'm going to put a box around all the NADH because that is important for us. Okay, then this 2 carbon acetyl coenzyme A condenses with 4 carbon oxaloacetic acid to form citric acid. Citric acid is converted to alpha ketoglutaric acid. So now again I'm going to, so this is the actual Krebs cycle, isn't it? This cyclic portion is the actual Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. So I don't have to circle anything because they have given it in blue already. So we get the first NADH over here. NAD plus oxidizes citric acid into alpha ketoglutaric acid, and a molecule of carbon dioxide is liberated. Then alpha ketoglutaric acid is, again you get a molecule of carbon dioxide, again you get the second NADH. So this is the first NADH, this is the second NADH from the Krebs cycle, and then it gets converted into succinic acid. Notice we are getting an energy equivalent GTP molecule. GTP molecule will help in the synthesis of, quickly ATP will be synthesized from GTP. Then succinic acid is oxidized into malic acid. Now this I will put a circle around because this is also important for us. We get FADH2. Who is the oxidizing agent? FAD plus. FAD plus picks up 2 hydrogen and it itself becomes FADH2. Malic acid is again oxidized into oxaloacetic acid. The oxidizing agent is NAD plus, which itself gets reduced into NADH plus H plus. So this is the third NADH that we are getting. Okay, so now let us say this whole thing that you're seeing, it is starting off with one pyruvate molecule, but I hope you all remember one glucose molecule through glycolysis gave us 2 pyruvic acid molecule. That means whatever you are seeing here should happen twice. Why it should happen twice? Because whatever you are seeing here, we have started it with 1 molecule of pyruvic acid, but from 1 glucose we get 2 pyruvic acid. That means the Krebs cycle should also happen twice. So let us count the NADH now, including this. So here it was 1, 2, 3, and let me make this 4. 4 NADH2. So if I say from 1 pyruvic, or I can say from 1 glucose. 1 glucose is nothing but 2 pyruvic. So from 1 pyruvic acid I got 4 NADH, and how many ATPs? 1 ATP, which was initially GTP, which helped in the synthesis of ATP. How many FADH2? 1 FADH2. Now if I were to convert this in terms of glucose molecule, this will become 8 NADH, this will become 2 ATP, and this will become 2 FADH. And one more thing, how many carbon dioxide molecules am I getting here? 3 carbon dioxide molecules. So from 1 pyruvic I am getting 3 carbon dioxide. So for 1 glucose or 2 pyruvic acid I will get 6 carbon dioxide. So you have to learn what are the products of the Krebs cycle from what? From 1 pyruvic, otherwise 2 Krebs cycles from 1 glucose. Why 1 glucose is 2 Krebs cycle? Because 1 glucose molecule breaks down into 2 pyruvic. Each pyruvate will take part in Krebs cycle. So this is important actually, because we are considering not just one pyruvate but both the pyruvic acid molecules, which is coming from 1 molecule of glucose. So we get 8 NADH2, 2 ATP, 2 FADH2, and 6 molecules of carbon dioxide. And if you remember, from glycolysis how much did we get? From glycolysis of 1 glucose molecule we got 2 ATP molecule and we got 2 NADH2 molecule. So now let us see how many, let us total all of it. So we have 8 plus 2, 10 NADH, and then 2 plus 2, 4 ATP. Okay, and we have 2 FADH. So this is total from what? Not only glycolysis plus Krebs cycle. Not from what? Not from only pyruvic acid point of view, 1 glucose point of view. So we have 10 molecules of NADH2, 4 ATP molecules, and 2 FADH2 molecules. Okay, fine. So now This is clear to all of you. Let us move on to the next pathway, electron transport chain. Electron transport chain is happening in the inner mitochondrial. We saw just now that the Krebs cycle happens in the mitochondrial matrix, but the electron transport chain happens in the inner mitochondrial, yes, membrane. So you know that if this is the mitochondria, this is the inner membrane. The inner membrane is thrown into folds called cristae. And then, do you know what the space between the outer membrane and the inner membrane is called? This is called the intermembrane space. And what is this substance that is present inside the inner membrane called? This is called the matrix. So that is what is depicted here. This is the inner mitochondrial membrane. This is the, inner mitochondrial space. This is the inner mitochondrial membrane and the matrix. And notice how in the inner mitochondrial membrane, there are so many protein complexes that are shown in the form of colors over here. A yellow complex, a green complex, a blue complex, a red complex. Yes, so many complexes, electrons are passing through them. Now here, which is the feeding substrate to all these electron transport chain? Now notice it is NADH, which came from glycolysis and Krebs cycle, and it is FADH. See here, FAD, actually here it should be written FADH feeds this complex. FADH2 gives electrons to this, and for complex 1, this is called complex 1, this is called complex 3, this is called complex 2, the purple one is complex 2, the red one is complex 4, and the last one is called complex 5. So see how electrons are passing throughout, isn't it? And as electron keeps jumping through the complexes, notice that protons are getting pumped from where to where, very similar to what we saw in mitochondria. In this case, all of you should remember one thing: the protons are pumped from the mitochondrial matrix to the intermembranal space. In chloroplast, it was from the stroma to the lumen of the thylakoid. Here, it is from the mitochondrial matrix to the inter. See how the protons are accumulating over here. Yes or no? So protons are accumulating. See here, let me put a box around the protons. As electrons pass through all these complexes are made up of electron carriers. See complex 1. It has a coenzyme called FMN, flavin mononucleotide. It has iron sulfur complexes, iron sulfur centers. 2 electrons are released whenever NADH gets oxidized into NAD plus. It gives out 2 electrons. The 2 electrons are picked up by the ubiquinone. This is called the quinone molecule, which gets reduced into ubiquinol, that is UQH2. And then the ubiquinol will take those electrons and go to the next complex, that is complex 3. Ubiquinol will also pick up electrons from complex 2. What is happening in complex 2? Electrons are given by the oxidation of FADH2 to FAD+. These electrons are sent to ubiquinone. Now ubiquinone gets reduced into ubiquinol. Both the ubiquinols are bringing the electrons to which complex? To complex 3, which is called cytochrome BC1 complex. And here protons are being pumped. Correct? And then the electron from complex 3, see, it is coming out of complex 3 to a mobile electron carrier called cytochrome C. Cytochrome C will pick the electrons and send them to a copper and heme containing cytochrome complex, which is called the complex 4. The complex 4 will pick up these electrons. It will add the electron to oxygen by picking up a proton from the stroma. Remember, not the stroma, this is the matrix of the mitochondria. So it picks up the proton from the matrix, adds it to water, and then it forms a water molecule. This is the oxygen that we breathe. The oxygen plus H plus, half oxygen means one oxygen atom, plus 2H plus gives rise to one water molecule. Again here protons are getting pumped into the matrix. And not the matrix, the intermembranal space. Why are protons being pumped from the matrix into the intermembranal space? So that the proton concentration here will become very, very high. See, they have shown plus signs. it becomes positive. Here it becomes negative because the proton concentration here decreases. So where will the protons diffuse now? They will diffuse through this complex 5 back into the mitochondrial matrix, and this proton motive force, like I told you in the chemiosmotic model, will use this proton motive force in synthesizing ATP molecule from ADP and PI. And what do you call this complex 5 which is involved in ATP synthesis? The same thing which we saw in thylakoid membrane. It is called the ATP synthase. It uses these protons which are moving through these H plus ions which are moving through them in order to synthesize ATP molecule. It is said that through the electron transport chain, we saw that NADH gives out 2 electron, FADH gives out 2 electron, and after all the proton pumping and all that, it is said that one molecule of NADH which gives out 2 electron to the electron transport chain can successfully synthesize 3 ATP molecules, and one molecule of FADH 2 that gives out 2 electrons which passes through the electron transport chain, which is a colorful chain that is shown here. It can generate 2 ATP molecules. So now in the previous slide I had told you, so now the rule is through the electron transport chain, because of the flow of proton through the ATP synthase and all that, one molecule of NADH can synthesize 3 ATPs, one molecule of FADH2 can synthesize 2 ATPs. So let us write that here. Through the electron transport chain, one NADH can produce 3 ATPs and one FADH2 can produce 2 ATPs. This was something which we had already discussed. Now let us see the products of glycolysis. From one glucose molecule, I had told you, both glycolysis and Krebs cycle. Remember, this is with reference to one glucose. We got 10 NADH2 molecules, 10 NADH molecules, 2 FADH molecules, and 4 ATP molecules. Let ATPs be as it is. Now let us say these 10 NADH will enter electron transport chain, and each one has the ability to give 3. So 10 into 3, it will give us 30 ATPs. Now these 2 FADH molecule, when they participate in electron transport chain, each one gives 2 ATPs. So we have 2 here. So 2 into 2, we get 4 ATPs. And through glycolysis and Krebs cycle, we got 4 ATPs. So I'm going to write those 4 ATPs as it is. So totally we get 30 plus 4 plus 4, we get how much? 38 ATP molecules. That means one molecule of glucose through aerobic respiration. When I say aerobic respiration, I am not including fermentation. What are all the things I am including? Glycolysis plus Krebs cycle plus electron transport chain is giving us how many ATP molecules? A very high number. It is giving us 38 ATP molecules. Is that clear? So you need to convert NADH values and FADH values into ATP values, because ultimately NADH, when it enters ETC, it gives how many? Like I mentioned here, one molecule of NADH gives 3 ATPs, one molecule of FADH gives 2 ATPs. So 10 into 3, 30 ATPs, 2 into 2 ATPs is equal to 4 ATPs. If you remember, Krebs cycle we got 8 NADH, and in glycolysis we got 2. So 8 plus 2 we got 10 NADH. In Krebs cycle from 1 pyruvic we got 1 FADH2, but now since I'm talking in terms of one glucose, which is Krebs cycle happens twice, so it is 2 FADH2. And out of these 4 ATPs, 2 ATPs came from Krebs cycle and 2 ATPs came from glycolysis. What is amphibolic pathway? Now amphibolic pathway is, now notice this is the pathway of glycolysis that is mentioned here. So everything is not a breakdown process. It's not like ultimately fats carbohydrates, proteins, all are getting broken down through glycolysis. See, fats are joining glycolysis by getting fatty acids get converted to acetyl coenzyme A, and then they join this Krebs cycle. Amino acids get converted into pyruvic acid, and then they join the bridging reaction of between glycolysis and Krebs. So everything is being broken down. Is it only breakdown? Is it only catabolic? It is not, because suppose your body needs fat, then this acetyl coenzyme A can be picked up from here and it can help in the synthesis of fatty acid. Suppose your body needs protein, then this pyruvic acid can be dragged out of here and it can help in the synthesis of amino acid. So it is not just breakdown, it is also synthesis. So whenever it is breakdown plus synthesis, catabolic plus anabolic, it is referred to as amphibolic pathway. The last part is respiratory quotient. Respiratory quotient is the measure of the ratio of the volume of carbon dioxide that you evolve to the oxygen that you consume whenever you break down a component using aerobic respiration. For example, the RQ for carbohydrate is a perfect 1 because the amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen consumed is both equal, 6 and 6. If you see the equation of the breakdown of glucose through glycolysis and Krebs cycle. If you see the RQ for fat, it is very less, it is 0.7. That means it's you're taking in more oxygen, you're giving less carbon dioxide. Numerator is less, denominator is more. If you take proteins, RQ is equal to 0.9. So you need to know the values of RQ and you need to know the formula of RQ, that is volume of carbon dioxide evolved to the volume of oxygen consumed. So with this, we will be completing the synopsis of two major chapters, photosynthesis and respiration. Thank you.